Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. Today we'll be talking with Supervisor Charles McGlashen, and in our second segment, the new mayor of San Anselmo, Ford Greene, will join us. Larry?
Charles McGlashan is a Marin County Supervisor from District 3. He's in his second term. He's also chair of Marin Energy Authority. He served on the Marin Municipal Water District Board and has been vice chair of the Marin Economic Commission. He's a graduate of Yale and has an MBA in public management from Stanford. Most importantly, this is his second visit to Marin Voices and Views, and we'd like to welcome you back.
It's great to be back.
First big question, paper or plastic?
Peter loves these props, but your board recently passed a ban on plastic bags, and apparently that's going to change the way groceries are moved here in Marin County, and it goes into effect with January 1st next year. Was that a tough sell, and was it harder than you think to get something like that passed, and how did that come about?
The basic concept was pretty straightforward. Grocers supported it even over a year ago. Bill Daniels of United Markets, Susan Houghton from Safeway, Mark Squire from Good Earth Foods, a number of people, leaders in the county, worked with us to develop the legislation. The big delay over the last year was actually due to the fact that the state took a look at passing a statewide ordinance that very closely matches what we ultimately passed a couple weeks ago. And that was an outright ban on those nuisance plastic bags and a 5-cent fee on single-use paper bags. What we learned along the way a couple years back was that paper bags have different environmental impacts, but they're very serious. And the Save the Plastic Bag Coalition actually brought that up legitimately. And so as we were working on the legislation, we knew we had to find a good way to deal with both. We had to make sure we didn't leave people high and dry at the checkout counter with no option, hence the fee on paper. We also knew we had to get rid of the plastic bags that are filling up storm drains and creeks and ultimately breaking down into plastic bits floating in the North Pacific, killing sea life. So we had to intervene and we had to get the ball rolling. When the state law failed to make it through the Senate, we knew then that we had to act locally. We got a shot in the arm from Governor Schwarzenegger, who said, bring it on, with members of the legislature, and basically they said, go do it at the local level since we don't have the will yet as a state.
Mm-hmm. Charles, since you were with us about a year ago, the Marin Energy Authority survived a massive broadside attack from Pacific Gas and Electric Company. We kind of set the table for the defeat of PG&E's Prop 16 statewide. And you, the agency, with you as the chair, you've silenced some of the critics by repaying all of the startup loans. Tell me where we stand with MEA, and do you think the controversy has subsided and people now embrace the vision and the future of the agency?
We've made extraordinary progress. Thursday night, the board is being asked to recommend a 14% across-the-board rate reduction in our electricity rates. We are putting over $2 million on our bottom line at the end of our first full fiscal year that ends on March 31st. We have a budget that we're looking at Thursday night that contemplates a $800,000 bottom line contribution for the next fiscal year, even as we roll out the entirety of Phase 2, serving 70,000 customers with the Marin Clean Energy Program, and a rapid increase in our energy efficiency programs at the same time. So the financial well-being of the agency looks outstanding. It was a proud moment to hand the county that $500,000 check paying back the loan from 2008. And our citizens were all paid back a year early as well. So it's good. The financial basics of our agency are solid and getting better all the time, even as we roll up. I am so thankful that that war with Joe Nation, Michael Smith, and PG&E is over. It was a terrible experience. Frankly, aspects of it were outright unethical, and the legislature is looking into those matters right now with the Public Utilities Commission. Mm-hmm. But we fought and survived anyway. I do believe, however, that there are still 20% of the citizenry who will never support the notion of government trying to do this type of thing. And it saddens me a little bit because folks will rather have a monopoly call the shots about electricity generation and electricity rates charged in secret. The monopoly has for years put things into the rate base that we may not really want there and taken things out of the rate base that we wish would stay there. And their ability to manipulate the Public Utilities Commission has been famous. So,
Well, and tragic with the San Bruno explosion.
indeed tragic. Not only are they trying to justify the use of $46 million that they spent on the June 8th campaign to bamboozle the public, they're trying to get that into our electricity rates even now. They also now are being forced to admit some pretty unsavory practices that have resulted in fatalities not only in San Bruno but in Hinckley, California. This is a company that doesn't mind warping the truth, and we've seen that from other big corporate self-interested players in the past.
And one of the PG&E things that they were trying to do last year was to get consumers to opt out of MEA before they were even eligible for it. Do those opt-outs stand, and have they put a dent in your projections?
Those opt-outs do not stand anymore, and no, the whole opt-out war that PG&E tried to wage didn't result in any more opt-outs than we expected in the first place. So our business plan, in fact, is a little bit better than we had hoped. And the people we lost, it turns out, are the kinds of people who just don't approve of local government doing anything. And so what we lost were the government haters, and generally the ratepayers who are left with us are the types who support innovation. Turns out one of the proudest things we've done in December was we enabled 2 brand new generators to hook up to the grid. They're working on that right now. And these are companies that we signed contracts with door to door in 6 weeks at very attractive rates for our ratepayer. Those 2 companies never would have been able to get financing under the old regime with just PG&E. A year of negotiations with the monopoly, months waiting for PUC approval. You can't raise financing, private capital financing. So one of the things I'm most proud of is the mere existence of the MEA allows the private sector to compete and flourish for the first time ever. This is the part of the argument we were making years ago that folks like Michael Smith were poo-pooing, saying, all you're going to do is blow it financially by floating a big bond. Untrue. What we're going to do is small deal by small deal give life to the renewable energy marketplace so that new players can get online. And we've already walked our talk and are getting those new producers even as we speak.
One more on MEA. It seems that in the works is a promotion for Dawn Wise, who's been the interim executive director, a very capable woman. My only question is that you're doubling her salary to almost $200,000, and it could kick up to $340. $240, okay, based on some other developments. Is this a little rich for these tough times?
What we found was that the energy business comparables that we looked at give a minimum of $250,000 to $400,000 per year to their CEOs. PG&E pays Peter Darby, their CEO, $9.5 million. XL Energy out in Colorado, $11.6 million. Those guys are not comparable. The little players like Truckee, Alameda, Healdsburg, Turlock, companies like that pay well over $250,000 a year. So to get a comparable, experienced, seasoned executive, we had to talk turkey with Dawn, since ultimately it was the board's conclusion that she's the rock star we were looking for in the first place. And I began to take it very seriously when the CEO of River City Bank called me personally, and the chairman of the Power Association of Northern California called to make it very clear, you've already got the CEO you should keep. Do business with her. So we had to come to terms with what the comparables of our players look like in the marketplace and get real about what it takes to get an executive like that.
Let me just follow up on one point you made before we move on. Your board of MEA has asked for a reduction in rates for its users.
That's right. We're,
you don't hear about that very often in the board of PG&E or some of the other energy companies. So I want to be clear that everyone understands that. And so your people who are signing on are going to pay less than they would have last year.
That's right. We're dropping our rates 14% across the board.
And is that because you're anticipating selling more?
No, it's more a function of the fact that we're getting incredibly good deals
Oh.
from our brokers, and the new generation contracts are cheaper.
But won't the smart meter fix that
Well,
and level it out?
We're going. It's exactly where we're going. I just had to make that point because I think it's a little unusual.
It's pretty good news that we
It's good
can
news.
put reserves to the bottom line 2 years in a row and drop our rates in the middle by 14%.
This is a good news family show. That's why we're asking.
We like good news.
But there's still a battle with PG&E, and the battle now moved to the smart meters. And you're reading about it in the paper, and people are trying to block the trucks from coming. Do you think that the sheriff and the DA should enforce the ban on smart meters?
I wish they would. If nothing else, one test case into the courtroom to find out who indeed ought to have jurisdiction over a local health and safety issue. The basic line of reasoning is that the Public Utilities Commission made a decision about this over a year ago, and so the position of those elected officials is we can't enforce when the state has preemption of this matter. The Board of Supervisors essentially agrees with that, but at the request of the people, we passed our moratorium anyway, and I frankly believe a test case in the court would help everyone sort out who really is in charge of local health and safety issues. There is indeed a bit of a gray zone. The request by PG&E to put those smart meters in made good policy sense, but in the last couple years, more and more evidence has arisen that there could be a health effect from the electromagnetic radiation. And while some people poo-poo that, many of us in Marin County believe that a precautionary approach, until we know for sure that something isn't harmful, might be a more prudent way to proceed. No one really knows yet.
So I could, if I wanted to, could an individual resident, me in my home, say to PG&E, don't put that thing in, and make them go to court? Is that what you're saying?
No, unfortunately, that cannot happen yet. However, if Assemblyman Huffman's bill passes, you would have the right to opt out and request a wired meter. I wish they had wired the meters in the first place, because there is, again, some rising science that says there could be some kind of health effect from all this EMF that we're living in day to day, and it's getting more and more ubiquitous.
Charles,
a wired meter would have taken care of that.
Before we run out of time, we've got to talk politics here. Jared Huffman is termed out of his assembly seat, likely to run for the congressional seat that's expected to be vacated by Lynn Woolsey. Where do you fit into the musical chairs coming up in Marin politics?
I'm going to stay local. I love the projects that I'm working on. I believe so strongly in the vision of creating competition in the marketplace via Marin Clean Energy. I'm working hard on the Sonoma Marin bike path and rail system, our non-motorized transportation pilot for Congress with bike paths and ADA access all over the county. These are incredibly important projects to me, and I want to keep at it for at least another term.
So you won't run for the assembly?
That's right.
Okay, Charles McGlashan, a clear answer from a local politician. Thanks for joining us today on Marin Voices and Views.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for coming back.
Good to be here.
We continue now on Marin Voices and Views, and we're joined by Ford Greene. He's the mayor of San Anselmo and a first-term council member. I've known Ford for over 30 years. He's an attorney, and he's widely known for taking on religious cults like the Unification Church and Scientology after he deprogrammed himself from Reverend Moon's Unification Church. He's no stranger to controversy, and his law office near the Hub features a free speech wall that seems to delight and irritate the people who drive by in about equal numbers. Ford, welcome to our program.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
And before we get to your role as mayor, are you still active in rescuing and deprogramming members of the Moonies and Scientology?
No, I haven't been active in recapture or rescue and deprogramming for decades now. Really, after I got my law license, I focused a lot on representing people and figuring out how to preserve First Amendment religious liberty, right to belief on one hand, but impose constraint on what kind of conduct was being done in the name of religion that in fact was really harmful and toxic to people.
Mm-hmm. And if you search the web, you got a lot of fans out there.
I've got a lot of fans and some fairly concentrated detractors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to relitigate one of your cases and maybe even explain it. You were instrumental in a lawsuit arising out of the Ross Valley flood district fee.
Right.
Case you won at one level, lost at another level. Ultimately, the Supreme Court came down against your side on that, which you were very critical of the Supreme Court. You took it and made some interesting comments saying that it was fatal to democracy as the toxic goo in the Gulf. But that's hard words. What was the fundamental issue in that case for you, and how did it affect the people in the Ross Valley?
There were two issues. One was the right to vote in secret, and the other had to do with the consequence of the violation of that right, resulting in an election going by 65 votes in favor of the flood fee, whereas if the ballots that had been rejected because people, even though they voted clearly, refused to sign their ballots in conformity with Article 2 of the California Constitution, if those had been counted, it would have lost by 141 votes. And so it really came down to election integrity and respecting the rights of voters. And at the time that that election was held, people didn't have notice that if they refused to sign their ballot, that their votes were going to be thrown out. And nobody before had ever had a signature line next to the yes or no box where under penalty of perjury you had to sign your name. And so it was those two things that really bothered me.
So in addition to the substantive issue of the flood fee, it really was an issue fundamental to democracy itself and how you're going to stand up and be counted if you actually exercise your right, or just be summarily rejected because you wouldn't.
That's exactly right. I mean, we don't sign ballots and we don't sign lists in this country in a democracy, unlike maybe what used to happen in Russia, where if you go one way, your name goes on a list. And that's one of the primary justifications for a secret ballot, is to protect the little guy, and to protect the little guy from retaliation, from fear of retaliation, and be able to go into the ballot box and vote one's conscience. And it was the violation of the right to vote one's conscience in secret and be protected from ending up on some kind of list that really stuck in my craw and caused me to bring the lawsuit with myself as a plaintiff. And I guess at a couple of levels I proved the adage that a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. But there were moments of glory there when the Court of Appeal, in a published decision, unanimously annulled the election and found that the flood district had engaged in a widespread violation of voters' rights.
My hat's off to you as an attorney. I can't overemphasize how difficult it is to take a case from a trial level here in Marin to San Francisco to the appellate level, and San Francisco to the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court gets 7 justices to hear your argument. That's quite an achievement, win, lose, or draw.
And Ford, I live in the district. I voted for the fee. I believe I signed my ballot. And I fully supported your efforts because I think that election integrity is very important. And so ultimately, what I've never understood is whether you supported the fee, whether it's called a tax or a fee or not.
No, I voted against it.
Mm-hmm.
I voted against it because what they were going to do with the money was never clearly delineated. And it seemed to me that more than providing relief for flooding, it provided full employment for engineers, consultants, and county personnel. And so far that's proved to be true. So even though they have the money, they haven't really come out with anything yet. And I'm hoping that they do. But and also, the Ross Valley is a floodplain. And unfortunately, San Anselmo is built right along the main creek in that floodplain. And I just don't see, when there are deluges of water coming from the sky, how man can do anything to stop it. And so for practical purposes, it didn't seem like a good idea to me.
All right, let me see if man can stop the advance of the smart meter. Like the county here of Marin, Mendocino County, Fairfax, and some other communities, San
Santa Cruz.
Anselmo has been debating and has voted on banning smart meters in your jurisdiction. But the county DA and the sheriff refused to enforce the county legislation. So is this just symbolic in your view, or is there a way to actually enforce it? And can I refuse to have a smart meter installed?
Okay, so those are three questions. First, I don't think that that a person your question about whether or not it's a symbolic vote. Obviously, yes, it is. Is it only symbolic? That depends on the enforcement arm. But going to the symbolic part, it's just because it's symbolic doesn't mean it doesn't have it doesn't have meaning, and it doesn't have an effect. When you have various municipalities across the state lining up and saying, no, we're going to have a moratorium, we don't want any of those things here, that developing consensus can't help but have an effect. Maybe not on PG&E because it's a big corporation and doesn't care, but it's got to have an effect on the PUC, which is essentially a political organization because they're all political appointments. So just because it's not that certain enforcement arms refuse to enforce it doesn't mean that it's without value. In Marin, it's really too bad that the two enforcement arms, the DA's office and the sheriff's office, have said to the board, basically thumbed their nose at the Board of Supervisors and said, no, we're not going to enforce it. And that bothers me because I don't think it really falls within the purview, certainly of the sheriff's office, to be making decisions about what is or what isn't enforceable when the primary political authority in the county has said, no, we don't want these things. The DA has got more discretion, but also there, the DA ought to at least prosecute one case so that there can be a judicial decision, because that's where everything always ends up anyway. And to deprive the citizens in Marin and more largely in the state of California from having the advantage of or the benefit of that kind of scrutiny, I think is a waste, and it's too bad.
So this is basic civics. The legislature, the supervisor said, thou shalt not have smart meters.
Right,
Sheriff's supposed to enforce the law.
right.
They're not doing it.
They refuse.
They refuse to do it, so it never gets brought to the district attorney.
That's right.
So he or she has no ability to prosecute or not because there's no arrest made.
That's correct. Their discretionary choice whether or not to prosecute is completely removed by the decision of the sheriff's office.
So the people vote for the supervisors who said what they want the law to be. Presumably that's what the people want to be.
Right.
And the sheriff is taken out of the people's hands.
That's right. That's right. So it's a peremptory removal of something that has tremendous popular support and sufficient popular support for the Board of Supervisors to vote on it.
Ford, on another issue closer to home, in San Anselmo, there are many of us who feel that the police department has been cracking down on local citizens for minor infractions, and we get the feeling that this is to raise revenue. Do you get complaints from other constituents about this?
Yes, I get complaints and also the revenue criticism. Going to the revenue criticism first, we don't make any money off of cops writing tickets. The state gets the money, San Anselmo gets very little money. San Anselmo is located right, I mean, it straddles one of the primary traffic arteries in the county, Sir Francis Drake. And Sir Francis Drake is hell on the people who live along it. We have to deal with complaints and issues, not about cops writing tickets so much, but about how fast people go, about how Sir Francis Drake has become shaped over the years with repaving. It's becoming more and more sort of oval. So it's high in the middle, low on the sides, the lanes are narrow, trucks, side view mirrors get knocked off on telephone poles, and periodically people go through fences of residents. So the traffic enforcement, it's a pain in the hindquarters, but I don't really have a problem with it.
And briefly, before we run out of time, are you a candidate for any higher office? We've got musical chairs on the horizon here in Marin.
We'll see. I'm not counting myself out in terms of Hal Brown's seat, but that's a decision that I have yet to make.
Ford Greene, Mayor of San Anselmo, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for a great interview.
Thanks for coming.
All right.